Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Kids Church with Reverend Karen Bridges. I'm a minister at Robertson Wesley United Church, and so each week we have been doing some different broadcasts to help all of us learn about people in the Bible, things about our faith, how we as a church work and function. And yesterday I started to tell the story of one of my favorite prophets named Ezekiel. Or Ezekiah, depending on how you want to pronounce it, but Ezekiel. If you are joining me, I always love to know who's out there and who's watching, so if you're able to send me a message, feel free to do so. So this is part 2 of Ezekiel. It's really a story. Now, as I mentioned yesterday, Ezekiel began his career first as a priest. He was about to become a priest when suddenly God had a different plan for Ezekiel. And that often happens to a lot of us. We think we know what we want to do, and then God might have some different ideas for us. Did you know that I was going to be a math teacher? Like I said, God has different ideas for each one of us. And sometimes we have no idea what the plan is. So Ezekiel lived a long time before Jesus. Ezekiel is found in the Old Testament or in the Hebrew Scriptures. And there are many prophets that are in there. There are several that we call major prophets because the books or the stories that come with that particular prophet are usually larger than what we call our minor prophets. So examples of major prophets are Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel. Some minor prophets would be considered like Amos or, there's so many and suddenly my brain is completely lost. At any rate, Ezekiel, one of my favorites. Ezekiel did a lot of strange and wonderful things. And as I said yesterday, being a prophet is not for the faint of heart. Being a prophet is a challenging calling, a calling from God. And usually it requires that you have to tell people things they don't want to hear, or you have to do things that people aren't going to like. And in Ezekiel's case, he did a lot of things that people thought he was a bit cuckoo for. They weren't sure that what he was doing made any sense. So I'm going to take us back to the drawing board where we started yesterday to kind of get us caught up, and then I'm going to tell you the rest of the story of Ezekiel. So come with me and I will get you set up with our board, my terrible drawings from yesterday. I need to switch this around. There we go. Ha! All right. We are back to the story of Ezekiel. Now, just to explain things again, what happened was Ezekiel and a bunch of the Israelites were living in Jerusalem when the Babylonians and King Nebuchadnezzar came in and took over the city. And so they took a bunch of the Israelites as prisoners and took them into Babylon, and among them was Ezekiel. Around 25 at the time, when he was in Babylon, he was sitting beside a river, and while he was sitting by the river, on his 30th birthday, he had this vision, a vision of 4 creatures with 4 heads, a wheel under each one of them, and then on top of it was this beautiful chair, basically a throne, and for God. So this was Ezekiel's idea or vision of who God was. And it was like a chariot that was blazing with light and fire. Now remember, Ezekiel was born and lived approximately 580 years before Christ ever even appeared. By Christ we mean Jesus. Okay. So we know that he had a vision, and after this vision, Ezekiel was then told by God, you need to eat a scroll. A scroll is a piece of paper with lots of words on it, usually words of God, words from God. And so Ezekiel took the scroll, ate it, so it went deep down into his stomach, into his soul, into the heart of who he was. And from then on, he was only ever able to utter God's word, to speak God's words. God commanded him to do a lot of things after that point. And part of the reason was because, his purpose was to let people know, to warn those who were in Jerusalem of what was going to happen to them. And also to let them know that God would forgive them and bring them back home, show them that they were still loved and they were still God's people. So one of the first things that Ezekiel did was he took a brick and he scribed on this brick what was going to happen to Jerusalem. And he put it up for people to see. And of course people ignored it because that's what we like to do. The next thing Ezekiel was commanded to do by God was to lie down on his left side for 390 days. That was equal to the number of years of their punishment. The number of years that the people would be punished for not listening to God, for breaking their covenant, their promise with God, that they would be God's people and God would be their people. And the reason they broke it was because they started to idolize, or they started to worship, or really turn their focus to things that were not of God. And when you do that, well, you're not keeping your end of the deal up with God. So, needless to say, Ezekiel had to lie down on his side for 390 days. He was eating stuff that was horrible. He was starving because he couldn't move, right? It was terrible. And then if that wasn't enough, after that was done, God commanded him to flip over onto his right side and lie there for another 40 days, one day for each year. So he did this. Do you think it changed what the people were thinking? No, heavens no. So like I said, he was pretty hungry after this long time of just lying around doing nothing. Kind of how it feels like for us right now. That he decided he was going to eat some food. And so he ended up using cow patties, cow dung, to eat his food. It smelled gross and it was quite disgusting apparently. If that wasn't enough, God wasn't done then. God then commanded Ezekiel, after lying down for so long, kind of like us being stuck in our homes for so long, his hair had grown so long that God told him to shave it off. Just like he was getting a haircut, shave off his hair and his beard. And so what he did was then he was supposed to weigh it and then divide it equally into three parts. 1, 2, 3. The first part, the first bunch of hair, he went into the city and he put it into a fire. I don't know if you've ever smelled hair burning, but it stinks. He burnt the hairs, and he did this to talk about how at least a third of the people, a third of the Israelites, were actually going to die because of famine. Because there were no crops able to grow, there wasn't enough water for things to happen, and they were going to end up not being fed well, and then they were going to die. So a third of them were going to die by famine. Another third, he took that hair and he scattered it into the wind, and it all went flying all over the place. And that's what happened to the Israelite people. Some of them were exiled and taken and put in various parts around the country. And then the last third of hair was actually going to represent the people who were going to be killed by other people, killed by the rulers. And so he took out a sword and chopped up the hair to symbolize what was going to happen. But he did keep some hairs that he then sewed into his cloak, as God commanded. Remember, God was commanding him to do this. Sewed it into his coat, and those were the people that were going to be brought to the new place, to the new promise, because God will forgive. Ezekiel was very clear that God's going to forgive us if we realize what it is we're doing. So that gets you up to today. So far we are only in about chapter 10 of Ezekiel, and there's over 37 chapters of Ezekiel. So now I want to go to chapter 12. I think this one's kind of funny. It says, "The word of the Lord came to me, mortal," so it's like human, "you are living in the midst of a rebellious house," a house that's not doing what they're supposed to do, "who have eyes to see but do not see, who have ears to hear but do not hear." So basically, they're not listening and they are not seeing what Ezekiel and God want them to see, because they're a rebellious house. "Therefore, humans, prepare yourselves," and Ezekiel, "prepare yourself an exile bag." So imagine you had to leave your home and you were only allowed to take one bag with you. What would you put in it? So he packed his bag, and God said, "You shall go like an exile from your place to another place in their sight." So he wanted to make sure that the people saw Ezekiel do this. "Perhaps they will understand, though they are a rebellious house. You shall bring out your baggage by day in their sight. You shall go out yourself at evening in their sight, as those do who go into exile. Now this is the funny part. He was then supposed to dig a hole in the wall of his house and carry the bag and get in there into the dark, cover your face that they may not see the land. And this is a sign for the house of Israel. So Ezekiel, again, doing what God commanded in his house. There's the door. Actually dug a hole in his wall. Now the walls in Jerusalem back then would have been made of straw and dirt. So they were quite thick, like thick walls. And so he dug inside the wall until he was allowed to scrunch himself into that little hole. And there he was to be for a while, hoping that they would understand what was going on. And of course, they had no idea because they couldn't see and they weren't listening. Well, this really frustrated God, made God very mad. But it wasn't the end. God starts to feel bad for the people, and then Ezekiel is kind of helping with all of that. And so God changes the approach. And instead, Ezekiel has another vision. Ezekiel has a lot of visions. We saw the vision here, we saw the vision in the brick. This time, the vision that he is going to have is of a big watchtower. So imagine a really tall tower. Now, sometimes people have watchtowers on the land that are really high so that they could see if anybody was coming to attack them. And up on the top of this tower was Ezekiel. Give him back his cloak. And remember, he doesn't have any hair. So Ezekiel was on the top of the watchtower, and this was to symbolize that God was actually going to protect the people, that God would be the good shepherd. So if people stopped listening to other leaders in their midst and instead focused their attention on what God wanted them to do, they would be protected and cared for, just like a sheep. So pretend this is like the shepherd watching the sheep, or God watching the people, caring for, making sure that they are protected and that nothing bad is going to get to them. Well, the people were starting to listen at this point. They were getting it. They were listening to hear what they were supposed to do. How were they supposed to respond? What were they supposed to do to show God that they really did care and that they wanted to know what was going on? Now, we are getting to my favorite part of Ezekiel, the part that probably a good chunk of you have heard. Have you ever heard about the Valley of Dry Bones? I want you to find your Play-Doh that we made way at the beginning of this pandemic. See if you can find your Play-Doh. I have been creating a Valley of Dry Bones. So I'm going to take you there now. And I'm going to flip you around. All right. We are now at the Valley of Dry Bones. And hello to all of you who are joining me. All right. So as you can see, I took my Play-Doh and I started to make human bones. So you can imagine that Ezekiel had this vision that there was a valley. So imagine Ezekiel walking down into the valley, lots of hills or mountains around him. And when he got to the bottom of the valley, he saw just a valley full of dry bones, basically a place where it looked like a whole bunch of people had died altogether. Have you ever seen bones out on the road? When I was in Africa, I saw quite a few bones lying around as we were driving all over the place, because that's all that's left often after somebody, say a lion has killed a warthog or something like that. Even the birds come in and pick at it, but I won't get too gross. So imagine this valley of dry bones. And in it, basically, God said to Ezekiel, let's pretend this is Ezekiel here. We got Ezekiel. Oh, and you can make your own valley of dry bones. So Ezekiel goes down, sees all these dry bones, and God commands them to rise. Tells Ezekiel to tell them to get up, dry bones. God commands you to get up. And so slowly you can imagine the rattling that started to happen as the bones started to come together, as the heads started to attach themselves to a skeleton, and some arms started to come, and then maybe some leg bones. I guess that's a better arm bone. Maybe some leg bones. Leg bone, them dry bones. There's lots of songs about Ezekiel, but you can imagine these are like rib bones and everything else, and there's other skeletons. So the bones started to come together, and when bones kind of come together, they kind of rattle and make a clicking sound of sorts. So you can imagine all these bones. There were lots and lots. I can't even come close to making all of them today. But imagine that these bones then, if that wasn't enough, started to get muscle and tissue and started to become human in this moment. And then God said, I want you to command them to become alive. I'm going to breathe life into them. And so God was the breath, and God breathed into these new human beings life, the Spirit. The Spirit flowed into them, and they became alive. And that was the vision. Now, what on earth does this vision mean? What does this mean? Really, God was telling people about how they had gone through, or they were, in God's words, spiritually dead. Not physically, but spiritually. Sometimes when we lose our faith, we can feel spiritually dry. Or sometimes we might wonder, does God really exist? Maybe we haven't felt that presence very much. And that can be what the Valley of Dry Bones is like. This moment of dry, lack of nourishment, maybe just feeling like you're lying there doing nothing. But the Spirit of God was going to come, is going to come, is here, and is going to envelop each one of us and bring us new life and give us a new opportunity. Because remember, they had all made the mistake of breaking the covenant with God. And Ezekiel promised us that God would forgive them and that they can start again in this new relationship with God. And I mean, that's the good news for all of us too, is that God always gives us a second chance, an opportunity to try things again, to learn from our mistakes. So I want to tell you, because that wasn't the end of the story, Ezekiel actually had one more vision. And in this particular vision, what he saw was the Temple of Jerusalem. So the reason everybody was fighting over Jerusalem, again, I told you this a little bit yesterday, was because of the fact that Muslims, Christians, and Jewish people alike believed that it was a holy place. The temple in Jerusalem was a holy place, a place where God was present. And they all wanted to be a part of it. And they were fighting over control of it, as humans do. So, for quite a few chapters, Ezekiel has this vision of a new temple and comes up with, all the measurements and everything else to make the most perfect, ideal temple there ever was. So the best temple in the world creates this temple. I'm going to create it up here on high. So just imagine there's a hill, because we always want it to be at the top so that everyone can see it. And so built this beautiful temple. We're going to give it a dome. A beautiful temple would have stairs and probably some columns. Big door so that everyone can come in. The most beautiful temple. And what happened at the temple in this vision is that there was water flowing from 4 different directions. From the north to the west, to the south, and to the east. There was water flowing from out of every side of this thing, reminding us of our connection to God, the renewal, the healing, the opportunity to start fresh and again. To start again is a great opportunity. And in some ways, at the end of this time of social distancing, we all have the chance to start fresh, to really make good choices in our lives, maybe to focus our lives and find better balance between just doing things for ourselves because they're fun, to doing things that help other people and make this world a better place. And so as Christians, we are called to find that balance. We are called to share what we have with all people, to love one another as we would be loved, as I've said many times over the last few weeks. So with all of this in mind, this was going to be the heart of Jerusalem, the heart of the Holy Land. If you were to think about the church and Robertson Wesley, what do you think is the heart of Robertson Wesley? What is the heart of Robertson Wesley? Is it the sanctuary? Is it the building? Is it the organ? Is it the people? Is it God? Is it the people that we help? What is the heart of our church, do you think? When I think about it, because I've been in the church and it's pretty empty right now, it is the most beautiful vessel, beautiful building in itself, and makes me feel a sense of connectedness to God and to the Spirit because of its beauty and the stained glass windows and the dark wood. But really for me, the heart of the church is you. It's the people. What makes a church is the people and the spirit in which we live and work and let our spirits flow into this world. And we know we got lots of spirit at Robertson Wesley, lots of spirit as Christians in this world. And I hope that going forward, Ezekiel's words and all of the strange and wonderful things Ezekiel did will remind us that we need to pay attention and to make sure that we too are holding our covenant with God, that we aren't breaking our covenant with God. And so if you think about the Ten Commandments, that's part of what helps us understand what our agreement is with God, that we're not going to hurt other people, we're not going to steal, we're not going to do all of those things that harm other people. And instead, we are going to do as Jesus taught us, which came much later. And what Jesus taught us was about how we need to clothe one another, to feed one another, to nourish one another, to be present to one another, to forgive one another. Very important. So this is Ezekiel. Ezekiel is cool, if you ask me. Ezekiel had a hard life, but in the end, he helped to protect the people and bring them to understand God again, to connect them back up to God. So prophets, though they aren't always liked, are needed. And there's probably some modern day prophets today in our world, if you think about it. There's people out there that are challenging us on what we're doing. Maybe we're consuming too much. Maybe we're buying too many things. Maybe we aren't spending our time in the right ways or in ways that are really helpful to ourselves and helpful to others. So some people might think that Greta Thunberg is a modern day prophet, somebody who's young. Prophets aren't of a certain age, like you don't have to be 105 to be a prophet. Jeremiah was quite young when he became a prophet, and there's probably many other examples. Some people have talked about Desmond Tutu as a modern day prophet, or Mother Teresa, Martin Luther King Jr. There's lots and lots of examples of people who gave humans or gave communities a message, reminding them of what needed to change to make the world a better place, so that people were not being harmed or being treated unfairly. And that is what being Christian is about. So I hope that Ezekiel will inspire you. Make your valley of dry bones and turn them into I'm thinking about stop motion. I know that one of the children in our midst is doing a lot of stop motion, and that might be a fun thing to do with our dead bones rising up. I didn't have time to create one, but you get the idea. Anyway, that's what's happening. I hope that you will join me on Sunday for worship. Kids Church is going to be a worship service starting at 9:30. No Zoom this time. but please join me on Facebook Live. I always love to see you there. So hello to Claudia, and I think Sage was here, and Leaf, and hello to all the others who are online as well. It's good to see you all. Remember, you are not alone. God loves you. Go in peace. Serve this world in the best way you can. Let the Spirit of God envelop you and let energy spread out to the world. Go in faith, friends. We will talk to you soon. Bye.